Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
Ben Standig with us from The Athletic. He's out there scorching. Ben, you hydrate? Feeling all right after that nasty day y'all had to watch practice at?
No. If there's a injury report for reporters for the next day, mine would definitely be questionable. Reason being dehydration / life choices. It was a rough one today. I'm not gonna lie. For me, and granted, I did nothing but stand and watch people do things, but it was really hot.
Yeah, we gotta get you some fluids, gotta get you some electrolytes, gotta get you some salt. Never forget the salt. The sodium is very, very key. I'm just trying to help you out, man.
Look, anything you want to tell me, I am definitely listening. This is not fun this afternoon, so I'll take all the advice I can get.
All right, well, at least try to get your mind off it by talking about football, which is fun, theoretically. So, we make a joke about the Open of like, hey, this team not making a lot of magic. Hopefully we can have some fun with it. But realistically, like seeing the fan turnout the last couple of days, did we somehow underestimate the impact that getting away from Dan Snyder and to Josh Harris would have?
By the way, like before you even said anything, when I heard the intro, I was like, that does seem kind of like dated almost. I don't know if we did. I mean, I think the thing that was so interesting is the timing. Like we have focused on the timing of this from the perspective of, okay, so when Josh Harris comes in, no matter what, even if he wanted to make changes with the coaching staff or whatever, there's nothing really he can do. Training camp is here. The rookies literally reported to camp the day of Harris's Friday press conference at FedEx Field. So I think that's what's so interesting, right? There was no gap at all between the sale and this team being back together and being a public utility almost for the local fan base. So it really dovetailed nicely. It's like, if you had New Year's Eve and then you celebrate and then you wake up and it's the Super Bowl. Like there was no gap. So I mean, look, obviously people are excited and all that, but I just think also they were excited, and the next day or the next few days they had a chance to openly show their excitement by showing up to practices and things like that. So I don't know if we underestimated it, but I think it was a perfect way for people to express themselves, directly into the football when this happened.
I hear you, but they got almost 3,000 people on a Thursday at 9 a.m. for a practice and then followed it up with, I'm guessing it looked, at least from what I could see on Twitter, to be basically just as full today. I don't know how many people are going to show up tomorrow. And like, I guess what I'm asking here, Ben, is like, when we get to the season, Jason Wright has already told us that the Cardinals game is almost sold out. Whether how close to is close, of course, that's a classic sales mechanism, and Jason's job ultimately is to sell. And that's not me like taking a shot at Jason. Like we just don't know. If you do have that data, by all means share. But I do wonder, like week 3 against Buffalo, that second home game, like, is the stadium still going to be pretty full of burgundy and gold? Is this going to sustain, considering the tremendous outpouring of support we have seen already for practice?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think that's a huge key. Look, I think in general, I think we know this being on social media, right, where like it's not always the majority opinion that we're hearing. It's often the loud minority voices. And I'm not saying this is a minority voice. 100% of the people are thrilled that Dan Snyder is gone and anybody else is in his place. But in this case, Josh Harris looks to be like a pretty good option. I think tomorrow is going to be a pretty interesting opportunity to show exactly what we're talking about. They've distributed at the team at least 10,000 tickets for Saturday's practice.
Wait, you said 10,000?
That's what we were told, yeah.
Holy crap. I was expecting like 5, 6, maybe. 10,000.
Right. So obviously we'll see. I don't know how many people are coming, but if they get anything even north of 5,000 is going to be really notable there. I mean, like it's, as many people have been there, like the stands today I thought were a bit less crowded than they were yesterday. I can't keep track of how many people were milling about at looking at the food options or seeking shade themselves, things like that. But yeah, tomorrow's going to be fascinating. I mean, I've been getting there about 7:30 each day for a 9 a.m. practice, and the line outside today of fans when I got there was definitely longer than it was the day before. And tomorrow, if we're getting double the people at least, it should be significantly longer. So yeah, I mean, I think tomorrow's going to be a really interesting gauge of where things are at. But there's no question whether people show up for week one in that way or not. Everybody is thrilled. Now it's just a matter of how quickly do you get these people to go from being completely disengaged to ticket buying fans again. That could take some time, but maybe not. Maybe maybe that's what we'll ultimately see. How these things have changed.
Yeah, no, I mean, when people have had the chance to show up so far, whether it's the party that we threw obviously on last Thursday, or whether it's camp so far, people have shown up. So we'll see how that parlays at FedEx Field. Ben Standig with us here on the Hoffman Show, of course, Commanders beat reporter for The Athletic. Okay, on the field today, Ben, what was the biggest storyline? What was the thing that you as you head back to the media tent and prepare to ask everybody questions, what did you want to ask about?
Yeah, well, I mean, perhaps it was in part because of who was going to be available to us today, but I think the running backs have been pretty fun to watch so far. Look, Antonio Gibson, we know, is just a completely versatile option who can do so many different things. And with the enemy starting back in minicamp, we really started seeing them use these running backs more, the passing game, down the field, things like that. I think Brian Robinson's all-around game, look, obviously his story last year took an unwanted turn, no doubt, and that became sort of the focal point for him. And then when he returned, it was him just as this sort of battering ram up the middle. But he really also is a much more versatile piece, I think, than people give him credit for. His ability to catch some passes, we've seen that, and that happened again today. And so I think that is, again, maybe it's not the number one story, but, obviously Sam Howell probably is, but every day. But, I think those guys really continue for me to stand out what they're capable of doing. And so when we talk about the playmakers, that we start probably with Terry McLaurin and Dotson and Curtis Samuel and that group. But, the running backs, I think, are really going to be a lot of fun. I think, of course, I say the running backs, we don't really see them run a lot, though, at this stage. And next week when they put the pads on is where things really, for me, are going to get interesting. I mean, that's obvious if you're aware how training camp works. But for these running backs in particular, how are they going to flow with this offensive line? That's got some questions. But, yeah, I think those guys, to me, kind of stood out today. Cam Curl had an interception, a really nice break on a pass to make a play. So that was one of the defensive plays. That's me. In addition to Daron Payne, being out there, he had missed the first 2 days with a toe injury. He was back out there today as well.
I know that Howell threw that pick to Curl, and then from what I saw, he followed it up with a pretty nice deep ball to Dyami Brown. What did you make of Howell's day, the good, the bad, and also the context that Ron Rivera put it in afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's always tricky. Like when we're tweeting from the sidelines, I really haven't been much the last few days, partly because of the heat, but partly just I'm trying to not focus too much on Twitter because I'll get distracted with what I'm doing. But, there are times where if you just show the good Sam Howell stuff, you're going to be mega excited. The deep ball is really nice. He's got zip on the passes. We can see the mobility, all that stuff. But then there's the inconsistency with some of the throws. It's a little bit harder to tell if there's inconsistency with the reads because, we're watching field level. We're not seeing tape, things like that. So you won't see the whole field, not to mention the defense isn't really game planning or anything. But, I think there's, it continues to be encouraging signs in part because of the low bar that's been set in front of him, but also, like I said, the arm strength, the accuracy, I mean, all of that is pretty legit. So it's just going to be a matter of right now, fine-tuning things and moving forward, putting, put one day on top of the other, not to sound overly cliche, but that is the key for a young quarterback who, he said he's got command of the offense. I don't doubt that. And, I think he looked pretty good. I think generally, like Rivera has been, I would probably say, kind of downplaying Howell a little bit. And whatever he's asked about Howell, he immediately follows up with whatever he says about Howell. He then says the same thing about Brissett and Jake Fromm. Not again, there's no competition per se. Brissett's in the mix if Howell falters, but I think Rivera's trying to temper expectations a little bit, but also, and again, in part because we'll see. It's still Sam Howell is the biggest mystery out here, without a question.
Ben Standig with us from The Athletic here on the Hoffman Show. I've noticed he's done the same thing with the running backs. Do you think that's because there will be a more even distribution of snaps between Robinson and Gibson, especially than maybe we thought, where like Robinson is the starter, Gibson is the backup, and kind of has this niche role? Or is that just Ron being kind of, I don't want to say a politician, but like trying to spread the love and keep some air of mystery that coaches like to do this time of year?
Yeah, I mean, look, if we believe that like we're just going to sort of take what the Chiefs did, and then bring it here, they had some good backs out, or some interesting backs in Isaiah Pacheco and Jared McKinnon, but I don't know that either one of them was like some, getting a massive. It was a one-sided distribution to one guy over the other. I think they were pretty good about spreading the wealth there. So I think to that extent, that could happen here. It's been several months now since we were all obsessed with the notion of how run-heavy, run-focused is this offense going to be, to now we're settling in more and focusing on the quarterback throwing the ball. But, I think that mentality of still sort of, again, run first, run heavy, but not like this isn't the wishbone like from the 1980s Oklahoma or Nebraska games. So I think there is still a lot to be said for these two running backs in particular to being a really, really big part of this offense, a really big focal point to help try to take the pressure off of Hal, but also they've got some good playmaking potential themselves. Again, the top three receivers, these two running backs, if you sort of want to lump Logan Thomas / Cole Turner together, I mean, it's a pretty good group, and they give their young quarterback weapons. So I think they're going to be heavily involved. Look, if there's games where they're winning into the fourth quarter, Brian Robinson probably dominates the touches. If it's more competitive games or they're trailing, those are games where probably Gibson gets more involved. So, I think they like them both, and I think the game situations will ultimately probably dictate how much either one is getting the ball.
I know Rivera was asked about the tight ends today, and he liked what he's seen so far. Have any of them stood out to you in any kind of way, good or bad, so far?
They don't have tall receivers. They've got really good ones. They don't have tall ones. And when you see when Hal's throwing the ball to Logan Thomas, who's like, 6'6", and Cole Turner is even a little bit taller than that, that size
Every
really stands
time
out.
Logan Thomas walks by me, I can't believe how tall he is. I don't know why. Like, that's just a fact my brain won't accept, that he is a giant human. But that is a tall, tall man.
It's probably because he used to play quarterback, right? I mean,
Maybe.
Obviously some quarterbacks are tall, but they're typically not that tall. I think that stands out. But Cole Turner, when the ball gets in his direction and he can get his hands on it, he seems to pretty much pull it in, whether that's high over his head or a little bit closer to his waist. He's really he's been really reliable, and it's basically been a year, right, since we've seen Cole Turner be that kind of a guy. He got hurt last summer after he looked really impressive early in the offseason and never truly recovered, certainly not as a pass catcher. But we're seeing that unfold now. So I think that, like, to me, that's beyond whatever the offensive line does. I think what they get out of the tight end position is the big X factor. If those guys are able to be red zone threats, safety valves for Hal, or I kind of wonder, is there a world where they don't keep any tall receivers and Cole Turner ends up sort of lining outside a bit as that guy? That could be another fun way to use him. So I don't want to cop out, keep saying I don't know what this is going to be, but there's still a bit of a mystery as to see how these guys evolve. But I've been impressed with Cole Turner once again for a second straight summer.
Yeah, we're 3 days into camp. We don't know anything. That's the silly part about doing a radio show this time of year, or a podcast, or writing about anything. We can only say what we see and acknowledge that it is 3 days worth of data, and they haven't put football pads on yet. So I hear you. Yet, I'm going to ask you more questions because the show doesn't fill itself, Ben. The show doesn't fill itself. Ben Standig's with us here on the Hoffman Show. One thing I think actually you can put a little more weight in, and like, look, even on the tight end stuff, you say what you see, and it'll evolve as it goes as we get more data points. That's the nature of this thing. One thing that I do think is pretty interesting, though, is how they've rotated the defensive backs. And I don't know whether it's just kind of cross-training where they're getting everybody reps or preparing in case of emergency situations, or they don't truly know yet how they're going to align everybody. But how do they rotate them today after we saw a fair bit of rotation on days 1 and 2?
Yeah, like Kendall Fuller at outside corner is one constant in terms of the cornerbacks. But after that, it's kind of moving around. There will be some series of downs where there will be, Fuller with St. Juste opposite him, just like it was last year on the outside, with Rashad Wildgoose in the slot, who, they're using him a little bit more Wildgoose than I would have thought after how last year ended, but okay. But then, though, the next series, it'll be Emmanuel Forbes back on the field, moving St. Juste inside with Fuller the opposite on the outside. And I think, that sort of how often they want to use the three-corner look versus, I'm sort of waiting for Quan Martin to be a little more involved with the ones. Maybe I just missed it, but I didn't see a ton today. But, how often are they going to feel comfortable with the three corners where St. Juste is inside versus, wanting him to play more outside than somebody else getting involved? I think Forbes is going to play a ton. Don't get me wrong. I think he probably starts. I think he's really good. But St. Juste was, pretty good last year on the outside when given that opportunity. And there's got to be a feeling of, man, we really like having this 6'3" player who's always around the ball, available to us there. So I think they're probably still trying to figure out how often do they want to use their best three corners together versus, how often do they feel they need to have a different type of look besides that.
And then the other rotation spot that I think is pretty interesting so far in camp is a linebacker. We know Jamin Davis is getting up to speed. We also know there's no pads on yet. They haven't run any of the Cinco front, where he was obviously affected behind the 5 defensive linemen last year, and it's because they haven't done anything in pads yet. But how did Jamin look today after he had a bit of a mixed bag, including giving up a touchdown in pass coverage yesterday?
Yeah. So they did use that 5-man defensive line look a bit today with Fedarian Mathis, that extra. And at times it was Jamin Davis as the solo. Sometimes it was Cody Barton as the solo. And, I think, again, they're just trying to show off their different looks. And, so much of any kind of planning is, how do we maximize our talent, right? And they've obviously got these 5 defensive linemen. I'm not saying there's not more than that, but, the obvious 4 plus the second-round pick from last year. So getting that guy out of the field. And, I think Jamin Davis working his way back into, peak physical condition is going to be big. I think that, look, Chase Young is an obvious X factor because he wasn't basically playing last year. And, what can he do to add to a top 10 defense? But I still think Jamin Davis to me is just as much of an X factor because, he made strides last year, but can he really take full advantage of his physical talents to become a playmaker, whether that's being more of a rusher or playing more around the line of scrimmage or, stepping up in coverage? He is the clear linebacker potential difference maker they have. I think Barton, though, has started to show more and more. He had an interception today. I think it was a Jacoby Brissett pass. He's got some, pretty good speed and quickness. So I think those two still project to be the starters. I'm not saying that's breaking news or anything, but there's more defensive linemen and more defensive backs than they probably have slots for. And one way to get them on the field is to take a linebacker off. So I think that's going to be really fun to watch. Is do Barton and Davis show enough to keep them both together on the field, or do the Jack Del Rio want to go to as many 5 defensive lines, 5 or 6 defensive backs look as possible?
That is a very, very, very good point. All right, sir. Here's your assignment now: water, electrolytes, salt. Gotta get you feeling good because you got another big day tomorrow.
Oh my Lord! All right, I'm in. I'm gonna look for. Hoping I got one Gatorade stuck somewhere in the back of the refrigerator. Let's reach for that when I go back downstairs.
Yeah. So I know if you can muster the power to, or if you don't and you have to go out, they got a new product called Gator Light that kind of has all of that. There's some other stuff I can text you that also works, but. I appreciate you powering through this segment. You were very, very good. High grades on this assignment. We got to make sure you're ready to go tomorrow. That is the nature of training camp. Just surviving today is not enough, Ben.
I feel like you're like my cut man. I'm just coming back to the corner, and you're like telling me what I got to do to go back out there. All right, I appreciate the motivation.
You got it. I'm here for you. All right, Ben Standig, everybody. Go listen to his podcast and read his work because he's clearly working very hard for you. See you, Ben.
All right, man. See you.
All right, Ben Standig, of course, from The Athletic. You can catch his work there and the Standing Room Only podcast as well.
This is the Hoffman Show on the T980 and the Odyssey app.